Keith Locke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Green Party opposes this bill just as when the provision was put in the Police Act a year or two back with the support of New Zealand First and Labour and I'm not sure who else. We supported the exclusion of police from serving on local bodies, and I think there was a good reason at that time, and the reasons were well outlined not only by the Greens at that time but by, and I think the previous speaker referred indirectly to Ron Mark of New Zealand First. He was very keen on this legislation, and the Police Association was at that point, and I think still is, was quite strongly against the exclusion of police officers and quite in favour of this bill. So the lines really are pretty much the same, and I think that essentially you have to have a separation of powers between the legislators, and that includes the local body legislators, the judiciary, and also the police as the implementers of the law. And I think to have a clear separation, I don't think there's too many sitting judges have run for Parliament or local bodies and served on them. I think they see that they're bringing down decisions on cases of all sorts of citizens that come before them, and they shouldn't confuse that role with being in charge of bringing in laws or bylaws as either parliamentarians or local body councillors. So, I think the police, as the people who day to day implement the law, have to be removed from any suspicion that they may be acting in a partisan way or a political way. And I think that's the particular reason for serving police officers to be excluded. And I think it's not just like Clayton Cosgrove said, other conflict of interest situations, in that the police officers are potentially in a conflict of interest every day they're on duty, because they are policing, that they could be involved in any policing, and they could come across any other citizen, including people who voted them on, their colleagues on the local body, etc., etc. And I think in some ways this provision that was put in the original law, which we support being put in the original law, was put in also to protect the police themselves from any suspicion that if they, say, stopped the car that was speeding down the road or didn't have its registration, or what it was parking in the wrong place or whatever, and that person happened to be some political antagonist, some other councillor, or the wife or husband of a councillor, whatever, that there'd be no suspicion that the police were acting in a partisan political manner, even if they weren't, and in most cases they wouldn't, but the suspicion might be that, that police officer who's a serving councillor is out to get this other officer who's also a sitting councillor. And I think this avoids that. There's, in no way is this a criticism of officers who have served on councils, and I know when the original bill came up I had a chat to Alf Filipina, who I know very well, a serving officer who'd been on the Auckland, the Manukau City Council, and a great chap, a great community constable, has done tremendous things. But so if you just look at him and how he's managed the situation, you might say, oh, there's a bit of an argument, not to stop him doing both jobs. But in fact, I think if you look at it in a deeper level and wanting to remove the conflicts of interest, then you shouldn't allow that to take place. And there was reference to the military before, and how the military, by their own laws or internal system, they don't allow people to run for office, and I think there's a good reason for that. But I think if it's good enough for the military, there's even more reason for it for the police, because the military aren't dealing with people day to day on the streets, are less likely actually to be in a conflict of interest situation than the police are. So I think that if you add it all up, it's important to keep that separation of powers from the judiciary and the police and the legislators to keep them separate, not confuse roles, and for that reason the Green Party is opposing this bill.